glad to see everybody here. First of all, I got two news things before I introduce this handsome man here. I apologize, those of you who were members, there will not be a newsletter this month because my computer has died and I've been battling Staples and Spectrum and getting absolutely nowhere. So until I get, so I'm going to go to the mall and buy a Mac and see if I can. Yeah. And with all the craft fairs that are going to be this weekend, the Historical Society will be open. We've got 4 new colors of hats this year that Judy has gotten for us. So stop by and just visit or come by and buy a bunch of Christmas presents. So Casey Hughes, I understand that, where is Mary? That you graduated with her sister from Greeley in 1974?
A couple of minutes ago.
A couple of minutes ago, well, yeah. And he is the son of Linda Toby, a golfer extraordinaire. I'm so pleased that she's here tonight. And the Layton family, who were a big part of the creation, and the Smith brothers, who were part of the creation, and I don't know who else was involved with the creation of Val Halla, but Casey's going to let us know. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Oh, you don't need to do that. Thanks, Carol.
And when you're done, he's got, if you haven't noticed, he's got a bunch of pictures here to view too, so
And,
let her rip.
and a pen, because some of those things don't have names on them. I have no idea who they are. So I found this batch of pictures in the locker room at Val Halla, and they've been there for 40 years, some of them. And some of those people I actually do know. Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you for coming out. Light entertainment value coming here tonight. So I'm not sure how I get to be the pseudo-historian for Val Halla. There are people here that are a little bit older than myself, but they probably remember his stuff, and they're probably going to correct me on some of the things I'm going to say. But it's hard to recount 60 years of golf history, and what a great place. That's all there is to it. I could actually probably, if you want me to read this, it's like 34 minutes. You don't want to hear all of this. I can skip most of it. But, I got a lot of this data came to me from Bob Darling, and he had started writing stuff down back in the day because he was one of the original founders. And then another batch of it came from Dave DeSmith, who was he was a member at Val Halla, but he was also a famous golf writer. He tours the world, writing about golf courses now. So he handed down a fair amount of this. And I've been trying to write a book about Val Halla for about 5 years, and it's not really coming together yet. And every time I do it, I redo it, and I redo it again, and then I throw it away, and I start over. But the computer's actually starting to give me some options on, the keeping some things safe. For us, as a kid, when we first moved to town, Val Halla was literally our world. It was daycare. Mom and Dad both worked, and like a lot of families here, the moms all worked. And so, and it was initially, not daycare for us, but it was a safe place to go. Back in the day, we all wandered through the neighborhood, Pinewood, Crest, all those roads, Hedgerow. None of those were there when we first moved in. It was a lot of pastures in town. Main Street was one big pasture on all those little houses have popped up, and the town's changed obviously in the past, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. It's still changing, as we all know. But what it was, what was interesting about it, it was like with all those houses that popped up, there were houses full of kids. And Halloween was hell, to be honest, because you could run all the way from Pinewood. I should be on a sugar high still from 1970, but because there was candy and plenty and all sorts of disturbances. We didn't get in any trouble. It's amazing, but we should have. So it was pre-cell phones. It was pre-worries about your kids being kidnapped. It was a simpler time. At least it felt that way to me. We basically left the house when in the summertime, when parents left for work, we left to go to Val Halla. And it wasn't to play golf all the time. We were roaming the gullies around the second hole. And I'm going to, for historical sake, I'm going to remember, it's going to be the original 9 and the new 9, just to keep people straight, because I'm going to use the original 9 numbers because that's where they were. And they're still there as far as I'm concerned. But we basically stayed there until dark. It was dark. There used to be, the clubhouse has changed, obviously. It originally was 2 different buildings, and they glued them together. And I'm not sure who moved them, whether it was Cop or the town moved them and slid them together. And there was a big addition put on. I have vague memories of like finding this in a locker room that doesn't even really exist anymore downstairs. But we basically, they reconfigured the building. The original building was a little tiny cape that when you first came into the current driveway right now, it was on the left. And we didn't have golf carts. We had pull carts. That was it. There was no, everybody either pulled the carts or had caddies back then, as Greg knows, because he looped it like all of us did. We didn't get allowances. We had to, if you wanted money, you had to work. And that was the way it was when we grew up down there. But I'm going to refer to Bob Darling's story first because it gives you a little bit of a perspective. So this came directly from Bobby. And, there were originally, he's one of the original founders. So this is quoting him, so I can't take any blame on this. So exactly how does a place like Val Halla get started? Frustration, vision, pride, temporary insanity. Maybe a little bit of those and more. The idea for Val Halla Golf Course came about in the following way. 3 friends of mine, David Higgins, Ted Lauritsen, and Bud Bernard, asked me to go to Riverside and play golf with them. I had no clubs, no balls, no equipment of any kind. They picked me up on the following Saturday at 6:45. We waited from 8:10 to 11:45 to play. We had no starting times. At 5:30, we finished playing and immediately proceeded to Coyne's Sandwich Shop, which I think is maybe an exaggeration calling it a sandwich shop. I think it was maybe an adult beverage. But at Woodford's Corner, after they left, after we, quote unquote Bob, we discussed the afternoon's golf game on the way home. My friends were intensely interested in golf, and I suggested on the ride home that if they wanted to play so badly, why didn't they start our own golf course? Whereupon Bud Bernard said he knew of exact area to build one. By the time we arrived home that night, he had made plans for the meeting of the following morning at David Higgins' house at 10. Bud had topographical maps and had outlined the area where he thought the golf course might be built. We found out the owners of the property, who the owners of the property were, and proceeded to contact all the owners in the morning. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, we met again, and we had 150 acres of land under option without spending a dime. We'd offered shares of stock, here we go, $100 per par value to each of the owners of the property, and they accepted the offer. They were Dana Bragg, Dick Doan, and Nelson Blanchard. The initial discussion at Riverside was in August of 1962, and after acquiring the 150 acres, the next step was to form a board. The principals were David Higgins, Ted Lauritsen, Bob Layton, and myself, Bob Darling. So that's Bob's quote. But really, you think about it, this is 1963. Bob, David Higgins, Ted Lauritsen, Andy Bunker, Bud Bernard, Bobby Layton. I had the honor to know all these people except for Andy Bunker. Andy Bunker died in a boating accident in the Bermuda Triangle before we moved to town. But I knew all of the rest of the people. And while entrepreneur was an unknown or unused term at the time, these gentlemen were the truest definition. Getting a tee time and actually playing became an all-day adventure. They got frustrated about the amount of time it took, so the seed was planted for Val Halla. But they got together and decided to do it. And I talked to Marge Darling, and Marge remembers that they were having the meeting they lived on Tuttle Road at the time. And they were having a meeting, and her water broke, so that ended the meeting. So she had her youngest child, Rick, was born soon afterwards. But she didn't. She said it wasn't Bobby's idea. So there's a little bit of there's within the Darling family there's some dispute on who really was responsible for it. But they came up with a design. They figured out the financing on a shoestring. Found investors. Initially, Val Halla was owned by the members. It was a mutual. I remember seeing a press announcement, and I can't find it. Somewhere there is one. And this will get a little hilarious. A lot of these pictures are up here too. But basically it was a giant piece of land with a couple of streams and a lot of trees. And they got together a design plan and broke ground for the initial 9 holes. Again, from Bob Darling. They hired Bob Robinson, who I do not know, for no salary to be the clerk of the corporation. The corporation was formed. We started negotiations to build the golf course in the winter of '62. 5 of us started to clear alders where the pond area is now on number 2. It's going to be number 2 forever. We worked every Saturday and Sunday. We didn't take vacations. We spent every spare moment on the golf course for no pay whatsoever. On those weekends, our wives would bring the kids and furnish us with lunch. We had purchased a verticular chainsaw, which was one of the first ones made. It had a horizontal blade, and since we were all business people and not familiar with this type of equipment, we broke 6 or 7 blades in one day. After we cleared some trees, not much of it, we finally got to the top of what is now the second tee. There were trees around the whole. It was all trees, basically between 2 and 3. If you don't golf, it's 190 yards. And they pushed all the trees, the brush to the side, left and the right of the second hole green, and built a fire. Good idea. And there might have been, and this part of it is, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. I'm just reading this, makes me laugh. We started this fire one late Saturday afternoon, and the wind came up, and the fire got away from us. We had a case of beer cooling in the pond when Captain Bragg of the Cumberland Fire Department came across onto the scene. He commented that we must have had a pretty good party today, huh? It probably did not handle the fire appropriately, and it took a long time for the fire to burn itself out because of the big pine stumps, etc. When the fire was finally put out, Captain Bragg turned to us and said, "Boys, I want you to know that you will stay here all night to watch this fire should it get out of control again. I want you to give us a call if it does. You made a bad mistake here. You should have let us know you were planning to burn." They didn't even tell them. And we might have been able to get here a little quicker. But we felt pretty bad about that, but Captain Bragg was a sweetheart and let us go without a fine or a report. Then soon after, they hired a guy named Phil Wogan. Phil Wogan was a golf course architect from Massachusetts, and again, they've got no money. They're doing this out of their pockets, basically. And Phil agreed to design the golf course for $1,500, and he would take no money. He said well, they would. He says he wouldn't take the money up front because he said we didn't have it. So he said, take $500 now, $500 when we open, and $500 when we start the backside. We outlined the front 9 only. I'm unsure if these guys really understood what a dramatic change this was going to make to this town. It really changed the shape and the culture of the town because that neighborhood none of those neighborhoods existed really. There was a couple, Pinewood was there, obviously, but there were a couple. But these guys didn't really understand how much it would actually physically and culturally change this town. And I think that obviously the town's still changing. It will always change. But what they did, they did what they had to do to build the golf course. Bud Bernard, remember, his son told me they actually grew the sod for the greens in his front yard. So it was while the place was being shaped by bulldozers and skidders. One of the best decisions the founders made was hiring Joe Napolitano. Joe was the quote unquote the first superintendent of Val Halla, because he really wasn't a golf superintendent. Joe was a big, gruff Italian we called JD. He was tough as nails. His part-time job was building Val Halla. His full-time job was an engineer driving a locomotive on the railroad. And for people that don't know where Val Halla is, that railroad goes right by Val Halla, makes up the border on one side of it. So we'd know when Joe was on the train. You could hear him, he'd blow the whistle the entire time. So we knew it was his train. And also one of the first members was a gentleman by the name of Bruce Hazelton. Bruce owned Hazelton Heavy Equipment, which is down on Middle Road, and now it's the Stone Place down there now. But Bruce was a very generous gentleman who may or may not have been taken advantage of by borrowing equipment all the time. But he wanted to help because he really wanted to play golf too. So we loaned JD whatever equipment he needed to help shape the course. I remember Bruce actually saying this. He says at one point, he told JD that there's no way you can get this fancy skidder stuck. And they were building the 8th hole at this time. And he said, JD got it stuck the first day. And so there's kind of a swampy hill on the eighth hole anyways, but Bruce had to bring 2 excavators up to get that skidder out. It took 2 days to get that skidder out of the mud. But and JD did something. He did it really well. Let's put it that way. So eventually, the founders and members came on hard times. The golf wasn't that popular. It was, it was struggled for years while it was a mutual. And the town came along and really was a savior and bought the land in 1975. It was good news for the town or for the club, because the town came to the rescue with heavy equipment that they didn't own. So, a lot of things like, irrigation ditches and sprinklers and stuff like that. There were a lot of heavy, the maintenance crew, the town crew was down to Val Halla quite a bit when they first bought it. And then, they built the back 9. So it was, that really made it take off as far as, from my perspective. But it wasn't a country club. It wasn't full of snotty rich people. Nobody looked at anybody's wallet. They all sat next to themselves at the bar. The culture there, and I bartended, so I know it's like being a therapist. But they were tradespeople. They were bankers. They were electricians. They were ditch diggers, and they all treated each other the same. There was no class system ever at Val Halla, and still isn't. And I think that's probably one of the greatest things about the culture down there. It was a working person's club. And whether you were selling Yellow Pages ads or pounding nails, they were sitting next to you, and everyone was equal, and they just gave each other so much crap and sarcasm. It's unbelievable. It was really, I watched them, and one of the famous people that I'm gonna get to, remember, these are, and I don't know how to make a slideshow move, so it's by my fingers. But there's a lot of these people we'll see, over and over again, because they're from the same batch of pictures I found in the 80s. But you won't, in my opinion, you'll never find a place like Val Halla. Was it Camelot? No. But it was, kind of that Mad Men era, that TV show. It was kind of the same idea. With all the kids running around down there, there were a lot of good golfers. A lot of good golfers came out of Val Halla. A lot of pros have turned, a lot of our kids that spent their summers down there turned into golf pros, and they're golf pros or working at other golf courses. 2 of them, Ricky Darling, Bobby's, and Marge's kid, runs a golf course down in Florida. Jay Bunker, you'll see his picture, and I'll try, maybe, I don't know if I've got it here yet, but there are some of these, so there was a pool table in the hole. The basement, the clubhouse has changed so much, that And there was obviously some fun that was had there. There's Jay Bunker. So, and he wasn't drinking that day, I can tell you that. He wasn't old enough. But some of these pictures I'm a little bit horrified to show. But, you know, it was basically when they glued the two buildings together. I know there was some controversy because they made the original, where Rachel's is now, basically used to have a vaulted ceiling. The drop ceiling was put in when they put the addition on. The big banquet center that's on the end of the east side of the building, that was an addition. But everything was originally downstairs was, when we were down, there's the hole. That's a picture of the hole. It was, and you can't see it, it's a really bad, it's 81, so that's one of the ones that's out of sequence. But so it had screen doors that went outside. It was the original, it's about where the wall is still at Rachel's. It dropped straight down. But it was one big room, and it had, you know, it was beautiful pine vaulted ceiling in it. And we had, where, if you're familiar with Rachel's now, where the bar, the original bar was where the bathrooms are now. So everything's kind of shifted around, including the hole. The hole was our where we serve food, quote unquote, and you know, it's a little bit funny because I started wandering around there picking up golf balls, and the pro would buy the golf balls for a nickel. So that was, you know, we were running around in the ditches in the woods picking up golf balls, wherever we could. Then and then I started caddying. Then I did work with JD on the golf course a couple summers, and then moved to working in the hole with Winnie. So Winnie, think of Granny from the Beverly Hillbillies, but mean, real mean. And I swear to God, she was trying to be so mean that nobody ever came in there. She was trying to scare people out. But I do remember going in there working, and one day it was so slow, she says, well, go clean the locker rooms. I was like, okay. You know, I don't know how old I was, 17, 16. So, and Bud Bernard's sitting there at the counter, drinking beer, smoking a cigarette, because you could do that in restaurants back then. And he and Winnie were there. There were the only two people in the hole. And the basement in that original building was damp, and it never dried out. And the locker rooms were, if anybody took a shower down there, it was pretty rare, let's put it that way. So I go in, and Bud says, well, go clean behind the toilets. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll go do what I'm told. And it was literally black mold. It was just disgusting. And it says, use some elbow grease. And I went in, and I was like, oh, okay. And I went back to Winnie, and I said, where do you keep the elbow grease? Is that like Comet? You know, I wanted to know. I said, like, Comet? Where is that? I could have used a scraper. It was unbelievable, but you know, it was easy to paint over it than clean it. But you know, such memories I have about this place. It's unbelievable. But the clubhouse, the original clubhouse, was very functional. It was, the banquet center was upstairs. We didn't use it full time. We had the hole downstairs in the locker room, and that was. I can change this. Oh yes, we'll get that. We'll get to that in a minute. But you know, we, and they changed it, and it's fine. We tried. Falmouth got built. Falmouth Country Club and Woodlands got built about the same time. And so it kind of felt like we were keeping up with the Joneses. So we put this giant addition on the clubhouse, and we moved the pro shop, nailed it onto the other end of the clubhouse, built the big banquet center. And I know it was a little bit of a lot of people in town were a little upset that we spent a bunch of money like that, but it served us well. You know, the building's, I don't know how many years old now, 60 some odd years old, but the original way you went into Val Halla, there was a big putting green right in the middle of the entrance. Where the loop is now, there was a big putting green, and we would putt. It was a showcase, quite honestly. That was one of the things I was a little upset with when they dug that up for parking. But you used to drive around that, and you know, and you could harassed by every member or caddy, and we harassed each other as kids too. Greg can probably attest to that. But I remember being down there at night. We were putting at night. There was one big halogen light that would light up the putting green, and we'd be down there at night putting. You know, and in the summertime we didn't have to go to school the next day, and the bats would come around the halogen light. And so we're kids, we're throwing rocks up, and the bats would actually try and catch the rocks. It was pretty impressive. But it was, that tells you how late we were out there, for crying out loud. The original maintenance shed was on Greeley Road. There were two very shacks. We call them a shack. We call them a shack. There was one that actually had a wood stove in it, so JD didn't freeze to death in the wintertime. The other one was just cold storage for what equipment we really did have, which wasn't much. Everything we had was secondhand, and it really had it had a lot to be desired. Let's put it that way. The wind blew right through the place. So one of the features that kind of slips through the cracks, and some people may know, but the road that Val Halla is on is an old rail line. And it went across Greeley Road, went all the way to Lewiston somehow. There's some connection there, but it comes out of Stiles Way down here. That was a real, and that on the 15th hole is a big granite bridge there that's the remnant of the rail line that went through there. We basically, when the town did build the next 9, they actually built a new maintenance building more centrally located on the new 9. And that really was the big change as far as, all of a sudden the town, it was starting, actually, I'm not sure the town will admit that it was actually profitable or not, but it's holding its own, and thankfully the town does own Val Halla because it's going to be here for perpetuity. It's a unique piece of real estate. Caddying was, as Greg reminded me, we used to caddy when it was 9 holes. You would caddy, and they would go in and have an adult beverage and leave us caddies, and we'd go out to this, what we call the caddy tree, which is still there. It's amazing this tree is still alive. It's been shelled, it's been hit by 1,000,000 golf balls, and there's no grass. I don't know if the grass will ever grow around it, because all the caddies used to hang around there, because while everybody was having lunch inside, and because you had to go around again, because it wasn't, for 18 holes, you just made another loop. And so we'd stay out there, and Greg reminded me that he got a devil dog as a treat, because somebody actually remembered that he was out there and didn't have anything to eat with him. So it's and that part of it, caddying was, I think probably it's one of those life lessons you can't even make this stuff up. You really can't. I mean, I learned so much from the members at Val Halla, who are, it was like having 180 parents. I couldn't get in trouble. My mother found out I squealed tires in high school before there was no cell phones, and I burned tires on Main Street coming out of high school, and my mother knew before I got home. And it's like, okay, that's 1.5 miles, folks. It was like seeing eye parents. There were too many parents in town, to be quite honest. But we learned a lot about ethics. Learned a lot about life skills, to be quite honest. And so you ended up, as a caddy, you wanted somebody that actually could hit it to the caddy tree, which was about 175 yards. And there were no good golfers at Val Halla, because there were no golfers at Val Halla. It was a brand new course, so everybody was learning how to golf as well. There were a couple of people that had played before, but not a lot. But, we'd watch, to get somebody good was a real treat, because you didn't spend your entire day in the woods looking for their golf ball. And the first hole, if you haven't, I'm sure none of you have been out there, scaled this, it's a deep gully over there, and if you hit a golf ball down in there, it was never coming back until we went down to find it and sell it back to the pro. But for a nickel. A nickel was big doings, for crying out loud. But we were, we get regulars. Greg, who'd you have you had caddy for?
Cliff Reynolds.
Yeah, Cliff.
And
Tank, caddy and doubles. Yeah, yeah. You understand there were no gas carts. Everybody walked, and so there were, the caddies were a premium because not a lot of kids wanted to work, and lugging an 80-pound, Caddyshack bag around for 18 holes, especially 2 of them when you were caddying double some of the tournaments. It was like you'd be 2 inches shorter by the time you got home that day. But a lot of us made lifelong friends with our friends. And, I caddied for Dick Anderson for years, and Dick and Lou were members forever. But Dick had, literally, I'm not joking, it's a bag this big, which I still have. The strap broke on it, and he was going to throw it away. I was like, no, and I still got it. It's made of crocodile and leather. And it is, and it's like, I'm going to shine it up someday. But it's no strap on it, but it's got all my extra clubs in it, or at least that bag's full of extra clubs that I don't use. But the big thing was, caddying and ran into, Member Guest was the big tournament of the year. And this didn't get translated quite well from my efforts. It really was on one line when I did that. But Member Guest was basically a 3-day tournament that started on Fridays, but people came from far and wide to play Val Halla. And people invited their best friend from away. And the women had just as much fun as the men did. There's stories that I won't tell today. But there are, they would show up. Some people were so excited they would show up on Thursday. So this was Labor Day weekend every year. And the tournament would sell out in 30 seconds. And there's the old porch. The rules official, Crab Toby, debating with somebody. I'm not sure who that is, a wife's guest. Then we had the Member Guest performances. The ladies actually did do little skits and some, luckily these pictures are a little blurry, so they're protecting the innocent here. But, it was Tommy Hansen and TK. Tommy became club champion. He's still in town. He's one of the original kids like myself, a little bit younger, but he's hung around in town. And what I like to think about is what a nice young man he's turned out to be. He was molded. We all were, I think. I'm not going to say I'm nice, but we were molded by a lot of the people that were members there. So JD worked us summers like a dog, and I think the Smith boys can tell us that too. I remember we will always he would top dress the greens. He would aerate the greens, which would punch holes in them to make the grass grow better. And then we'd have to fill the holes in with a combination of sand or a loam. And JD was particular about, we used to do it, I swear he picked the hottest day of the year for us to hand shovel 1 shovelful of sand and 1 shovelful of loam through this spinning screen. And then after we got done doing that, we'd actually have to shovel it again and put it in a tractor and drag it out there and fill in the holes on each green. We hand dragged them. There was no union, obviously. We were kids. But, the older people that actually had licenses would get to drive the good tractor. And for us, it was a real treat because none of us had driver's licenses at the time. And there was one tractor that actually had suspension, which was nice. And then there was the tractor called the Indian, and I swear the Indian was painted orange out of a spray can. And it was a straight axle. It had no suspension whatsoever. So if it got bouncing, it would keep bouncing. And, and it didn't really have a good clutch in it. You'd have to double clutch it. And if you ever you never thought about putting it in third gear because you'd be going 100. That thing was, I'm not even sure what kind of tractor. It was an Indian, but it was amazing. But Worthington, thank you. It was gray, and then who painted it orange? By the time I got to it, it was orange. But so.
You described it very accurately.
Oh my God! And we used to, of course, back then, we didn't. they did eventually put a sprinkler system in. It was a lot of black iron pipe, and what happens with water and black iron? It rusts. And so on the days that JD it was a really hot day. Sometimes he would not make us shovel loam and top dressing material, but he'd give us the day off to go water at night. So that was a real treat. You get to water, drive at night. And of course, I don't think the Indian or the Worthington even had headlights. I don't think it did. So we're driving around in the dark with a tractor that jumps up and down every time it hits a bump. And of course, it's got a trailer that doesn't have springs under it either, with all the hoses in it. So we'd run from two. It was typically two of us that would go, and we would basically run out, drag the hose out. It was like a fire drill, and turn on the Rainbird sprinkler, and try and get out of the way before the thing started going around. And and of course, sometimes if it got a chunk of rust in it, it would just send water this way forever. It would drill a hole in the woods or whatever. But so we'd have to make sure it was actually moving before we would leave. But it was. It was a great job at night. It was on a July day, and running around with a hose at night was the greatest. And some nights, the more senior people like Doug Moody, who was probably 5 or 6 years older than myself, and he was our hero. He was worked there, and he actually would be driving, and we would be, one of us heathens would be on the back end of the trailer trying not to get bucked off after every bump that we went over. And so we'd run out with a hose and stick it in, and Doug would always, kind of gun the engine, like he knew he was gonna leave you there, and you'd have to run to the next hole. Otherwise, you were never gonna get there. But we ended up, and one night, Slank Dyer, Larry Dyer, another friend of ours who actually worked there as well, we didn't get the shift. We'd work during the day, and we hid on the second hole with a bunch of crab apples. And poor Doug, he's out there driving the tractor in the dark, no headlights. And somebody else I can't remember who was pulling the hose. It might have been Jay Bunker, it might have been Ricky Darling, it might have been any number of kids. But we snuck up on Doug and scared the living crap out of him. We started pegging him with apples and said, "Gully boys, gully boys." And to this day, it still rings in my head. He's the only way, he was smoking at the time. It's the only reason we knew where to throw the apples, as you could see it glowing. But we tortured Doug, and he got us back. Trust me, he got us back many, many times. So, one of the things that I've neglected at this point is JD's assistant was Gary Davis. He worked there and Gary doesn't get as much credit as he should. He did a lot of work there, and he sharpened the reels. One of the things about why we were sifting the loam and the sand was because we had to hand sharpen they were hand sharpened reels. And so you hit a rock and it would put a ding in it, and it wouldn't mow anymore. It would stop. So JD was always, and Gary were always sharpening those greens mowers. We had to hand mow the greens, same tractor, same trailer with no suspension, run it up, mow the green, go to the next one. But I remember when the first triplex greens mower came in, and you got to sit on the mower and drive. And it was like the big time, baby. That was unbelievable. There was a Toro dealership down on Route 1, which was always trying to sell us equipment. Of course, we didn't have any money, or the town, well, this is pre-town owning it. But so they were always loaning us equipment. And of course, one of the members owned the dealership, so they were very kind to us. They let us borrow equipment. Doc Harris let us borrow. The Harris boys let us use equipment all the time. But we basically, we spent summers there. Then of course, I moved up to the Hall as an short order cook. I don't know how to make anything. It's like Winnie did teach me how to make fries and a cheeseburger, but it was just like when I moved up the following year to become a bartender, I didn't know how to mix a drink. So, but I had a book, so it's like I knew about as much of being a short order cook as being a bartender. But they were desperate for people to work, evidently. But we had, maintenance buildings have changed. There are new building that's on Greeley Road near my house that replaced. That's where the original 2 maintenance sheds were. And Toby's done a really good job with the place. The town's really been very kind to the course, and I think the members are lucky to have it. But I think it's the cultural aspects of the Val Halla that I can't put a price tag or an explanation on, because it really was an unbelievable place to grow up. It really was. And I still don't feel like I'm grown up yet. I'm going to stay with the delusional thing as long as I can. But there, we had one of the things that happened at Val Halla was there's Eva Robinson smoking at the dinner table, and this is member guest tournament, and we don't know who that is. And there's, and the biggest, a lot of this, Holly Anderson was one of the people we turned out, who was a couple years younger than us, but she turned pro, and basically they had the championship at Val Halla, and everybody came out, all the members followed them around. And that's where most of these pictures came from. I'm not sure who. That's Stevie Tajura, who is, he was the assistant pro, and that was Holly's mom in that picture. You bet he was. Played for the Mariners. Yeah, little lefty. But he also a good guy. And Billy Anderson, Dad, followed Holly around like we all did. So the pros, because the club didn't have any money, it was basically a starting job for a lot of pros. They didn't, a lot of transitional pros. They stayed for a year or 2 years. And so we had, and I don't have this in sequence on this. Oh, there we go. Cheering squad, unknown person, I'm not sure who that is, head down. But Holly did win the states. And then there were other golf tournaments. The same group, they went, Cliff Reynolds and Crab Toby. There were a group of Val Halla members that went to Scotland one year. I don't know, it wasn't a lot of them, but I think there were like 16 of them that went there. But the other big tournament was an away tournament called the Demo. I could do 3 hours on just the Demo. The Demo was held in Rangeley. All these guys got together from Val Halla and went up to Rangeley and terrorized Rangeley for a weekend, yeah. And you can look through it's just, and it's destroyed. The picture is destroyed, but it's like 1992. But they would go, and it was an away tournament. They went to Rangeley, and the next year we had the women from hell. They found out the men from hell were up here, and then the women from hell showed up from Massachusetts. It was hilarious. They had their own golf tournament, needless to say. But we changed pros pretty regularly. And I had some help with this because I wasn't around. Royce Abbott was one of the first ones. And I remember as a kind Southern gentleman, but I think he came out of retirement to be the first pro at Val Halla. He was always dressed impeccably. And then somebody told me he had a bit of a temper and once kicked the screen door completely off the pro shop. So I guess I didn't know him that well. Soon after that, Jimmy Vino came in. Jim Vino was one of the best amateur golfers that ever came out of the state of Maine, except probably Mark Plummer. And Jim he's in the witness protection program. He got in trouble with a mob. I don't really remember all the story about it, but he was something about betting on the ponies or something like that. But then he showed up at the Maine Open like 6 years after he went into hiding with Jim Anderson. It was like if you didn't know who you were, now you're going to come play in a public golf tournament in the Maine Open. Well, it really didn't really stay in the witness protection program very well. But then we had Joe Falcone. His wife just died the other day. Joe was a former Riverside guy, and he came out, and he was a great guy. We really liked him a lot. Then we had Richie Murray. Richie was and then Ronnie, his son, followed him. And they were a 1-2 punch. And Ronnie was, and is still alive, one of the funniest human beings you'll ever meet. And he had the worst putter in the world. We used to call him Stone Fingers. But he was the only person I ever had a golf lesson from, other than my mother. And then we had Gary Reese, who was in there a couple times. He'll be here. But this is back. So everybody has, at the demo, Demo is the guy in the yellow hat. His name's Dave Morton. He fired too many high caliber rounds. He's deaf as a doornail. Couldn't hear anybody. And you can probably see the hearing aids he's got on. And he always had a pipe going. He was really a happy soul, but he never ever heard people's names correctly. So he made nicknames up for everyone. He couldn't remember their real names, so there are. Let's see, there's a page full of them here, but I won't go through them all. But this Demo, and there's Bobby Darling, Sr., was one of the original founders. I think that's Chet Woods, but I'm not sure. It could be somebody else. Roy Knott. These guys this was the Demo. That's Gary Whitney, Captain Gary Whitney, who is still a member at Val Halla. He's a great player and still out there whacking it around. And then, of course, you got Dick Ingraham and Doug Link. This is, again, Demo's nickname for Doug Link was Colonel Clink. That was very close. And Ingy had like 15 different nicknames. Ingy, the Llama. I can't even think of half of the names. But Demo made up a name for everybody. Oh, yeah, and the ladies were on tour, too. I think this is Waterville, because I'm just looking at you may know, Mom. But going back to the golf pros, Gary Reese was twice. Harvey Lamontagne was there. I think when they were building the golf, he actually helped with the design of the back nine. Mike Hurley stepped in there at some point. He was, a lot of these people a lot of these pros came and went quickly. There's Mike Hurley on the left. So, and Mike wouldn't take any grief from anybody. And then we had Jimmy Nickerson, who was a good golf pro. He could hit it a mile, except he forgot to show up for 1 October. Other than that, he was pretty good. And then Kevin Roberts, who was a really nice young man. I'm sure he's a pro someplace else. Corey Mansfield, another transient. Then Brian Bickford. See, Brian and I grew up together, and Brian was a really good player as a kid. And he went into the healthcare business and got out of golf. We played amateur golf, but he ended up coming back to Val Halla and becoming a head pro for us. And it was probably one of the best things that it really was a great thing for youth golf, which he's still doing. So Brian started the youth program, Wine and Nine, got women back on the golf course. It actually got people out there training, letting some women get out there on the golf course, which some people didn't. When Mom started playing there, they wouldn't let them tee off before 2. They wouldn't. You had to wait for the afternoon. You couldn't get a tee time. The women couldn't play before noon or 2 o'clock or something like that. It was a little bit. It was a long time ago, but now the women are right out there with them, taking up time. But Brian was really a good asset for the town and for the club itself. And his assistant Nick Plummer took over when Brian took it. Brian's now the director of the Maine State Golf Association. And he's doing the same thing at state level now with youth golf. He's done a really good job. Great guy, just a great guy. I've got some more notes, but they're the Val Halla member guest, the Demo, and then there was another tournament that was at Calcutta's. So you would actually bet on the teams. And there was some serious dollars there. And as an amateur golfer, when I was young, they wouldn't let me play in it because they said the IRS will find out about this and you'll turn pro, because you could win serious dough. You could win $15,000 in this tournament. They would auction the teams off, and people would get in, maybe have an adult beverage too many and spend lots of money. on teams, and it was like betting on a horse race to see who would win. I think this is you, Eva Robinson, mom, and I think is that Judy Ingraham? Yeah. So these guys, we turned out some really good golfers. They went down to Florida. I think this is a really blurry one, but I think that's you and Susie Whitney, right? My sister, and I'm not sure. I think it's Samoset, and they're unknown location, but these are really blurry. But this is the kind of thing that happened. Mom and Marge Darling, and Marge just passed away, and a sad loss. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great place to grow up. There's Demo. And I think that's Dick Ingraham. I'm not sure. This follow through doesn't look right, but I'm trying to tell from the back. My sister with Rachel Anderson, Dick's wife, and then there's that picture's up here, and that you put that together, and it's unbelievable. I should just a lot of stuff. The fireplace is still there in the clubhouse where it was. A lot of things have changed. You can see the ceiling in the I guess the Goodwill dress performance, but that's the old ceiling in the clubhouse, and it's up underneath that suspended ceiling. And someday I'm just going to pull it down, put that pine back in place where it belongs. But that really is, I don't know what you can say about it. There was an attempt at a mixed men and women's tournament called. It was going to be a Calcutta. Nope, that was a one tournament that didn't work. And then now they've replaced it with something called the Sadie Hawkins tournament, and they highly recommend that the husbands do not play with their wives because it's like the divorce court. It is pretty much, you randomly, the women get to pick who they play with, and it's a fun 2-day tournament, right? You guys play 2 days now? Yeah. So, but I don't know, what more to tell you about the Val Halla other than it was and is a special place. We're very lucky to have it. Very lucky that the town probably funds it, but it's kind of holding its own now, I think. And I think that we have been blessed by these 6 guys who put this thing together. Yeah, I can't thank the Laytons, your dad, special guy, all these guys, the Higginses, all these families that got together, and they're all, David Jr. is still a good friend of mine. I mean, they're all, became lifelong friends that, was it competitive? Did we like to beat each other with the golf clubs? I mean, not physically, but we like to win. But we've all become such good friends, and I don't know how I went from being this little kid digging out golf balls with my toes in the mud from the second hole pond to somebody that's gonna getting a little bit long in the tooth, but it is I can't thank these guys enough. And with that, I will say, the end. And anybody has, you can correct me at infinitum. The Worthington, thank you very much. I forgot. I thought it was an Indian. I think we called it the Indian because it was bouncing so much.
It had an Indian head.
Indian head on the front. Yep.
The foot on it.
Yeah. I think that was probably why we got it. Anybody have any questions or want to, correct me on what I've spoken about? I'll be glad to take abuse or questions. Yes, dear.
Where do you Val Halla come from?
Good question. Do we know?
Valley of the Gods.
Valley of the Gods.
I heard that,
Val Halla came from the.
I heard the original plan for that land was a nursing home. The nursing home was called Val Halla.
It was going to be a nursing home?
Over on where your house is now.
Okay, it's going that way now. It's really close to a nursing home right now, Greg. Thank you for reminding me.
And that's where those 6 guys came up with.
Oh, okay. So it was, they did come up with the name. And so, there is a Val Halla in New York. It's a famous course, but it's one word. So we have the luxury of being two-worded Val Halla. But it was yes, dear.
What year did they start building the second line?
I think it was 76 is my best guess, because the town took it over in 75. There's a story about Harlan Story, who was sitting on the town council at the time, hitting the first ceremonial drive off the first tee with Dave Higgins' driver, and he broke it. First swing, he broke the shaft of the driver. I'm not sure if the ball ever left the tee, but he definitely broke Dave Higgins' expensive driver. So I think it's right around 75. That's my guess. And somebody else, Denny?
My father was telling me they brought the same architect back.
Bill Wogan?
To do the new nine.
Yeah.
Kind of redo it again. And there was supposed to be a lot more fairway traps on the old nine that were just never going to put in. And the guy was kind of mad. He wasn't going to do the back nine. But he was mad that they didn't put in the fairway traps on the front nine.
Oh.
Because you know in the back nine there's way more fairway.
Oh, yeah.
But he said that they just walked through the woods and the guy would just stop and say, the 14th hole will be right here. And they'd
That's
put a
exact-
stake in the ground and
Yep.
the guy would start walking through the woods and he'd say, we'll put the tee right over here.
Yep.
And they were just in thick woods.
Yep, it was a forest.
Yeah.
And that that's how I remember it. And then of course, when they did design the course and had it actually trimmed out, it was actually playable. We had a microburst come in and wipe out like 400 trees, and it made some of those holes a little bit more dangerous because all of a sudden we're hitting it was back and forth at each other.
My father did play in that first round ever.
With
It was supposed to be the first round ever, but he said every time he hit his ball into the woods, he found 3 more balls in there. Somebody was seeking out.
I hadn't get out there to find those nickels yet. I hadn't got a chance to. That's $1 million question. I haven't quite figured out why they've reversed them. They wanted to be able to see they wanted to be able to control the play was the rationale, but they didn't really change it that much.
One of the reasons why they changed it was to get not walking up the hill. My dad used to play, and walking up the old lady's hill was quite a job, and I found out it was today.
It still is.
But that was one thing. But when they did change it around, it got more play on the Greeley Road side, shifted over to the new nine. So the Greeley Road side, what was the original fields there, finally got grassed in.
Yeah, they finally.
Right behind your house, there was a couple of ditches through there for years and years. Put them in, wash them out, put them in, wash them out. But changing that over so that the play went that way, and they've been alternating the play different days of the week, so it gets a lot more uniform.
Yeah, it's it's been some of the older members preferred it the numbers the way I remember them, one starting there but it's still 18 holes if you're going to make it all the way around. you got to go 18 holes. You're going to get some miles on it. But any other questions I can try and?
You mentioned about the trees on the second hole.
Yes.
And we got a guy down there. There were 3 of us set out to work on the second hole to dig out his stump with hand tools. With Reggie Hughes, who used to be principal here in Cumberland, was there, and it's Neil, and Neil showed up. And guy showed up with the Worthington. Anybody know how to survey? We all looked at each other, and I'm looking at the shovel, and I said, well, I know how to be a rod man. He says, you're it. So I spent the rest of the week driving around with the Worthington and holding the rod while these guys are digging. And they made no progress whatsoever. And you were mentioning the equipment. You didn't mention the first equipment they had was from Barrier Construction. Had a bunch of old junk, to be quite truthful, that somehow they got down there into the thing. And one of the big dozers, I think D8, D9 size, they told the guy, take that dozer down through there. Well, many of you know a bulldozer, there's 2 tracks, and if you pull both levers back, it puts the brakes on, if you have brakes. There's only brakes on one track. So he starts down over the hill, there's a few choice words as he starts pulling it sideways and just turning it, almost rolled it over. Finally stands it up, almost 89 degrees. He was getting off the post. Settle back down, few more choice words. That stuff is still buried.
It will be there forever.
He got a little bit low.
Do
The original one.
yeah.
Because we used to park and have our lunch break down where the old pump house was.
Yeah. Well, starting the pump house, the pump house was, that was like starting a dinosaur,
Oh,
the
yeah.
original one. You just didn't know whether it was going to blow up or it was actually going to start.
And that's where most of the black iron pipe was. It was transit pipe that went through the rest of it, which was basically ceramic. And we had a guy come out, and Joe Napolitano, I never know him as JD, but it was Joe. And he was the father of Paul, who was a good friend of mine. And they showed us how to put these couplings together by using a crowbar and putting it against the post and all of this. And in about 20, 30 minutes, they'd get a coupling on. And as soon as the guy left, Joe says, he's fitting. He says, grease up those couplings and hand them to me. And as you say, Joe was a good big boy. Poop, poop, poop. He's going through them. And we started laying pipe. These guys show up. What are you guys doing? Well, we're laying pipe. Have you inspected all of those couplings? Oh, they're fine. Don't worry about it. So he gets down in the hole and starts in inspecting them. Couldn't find any failures. And they usually had about a 10% failure for it. And he said, I don't know how you guys did it, but I'm not going to ask. And off they went, and Joe got them on going.
Yeah, Joe, it was a rite of passage every spring because some pipe would break
Yep.
somewhere.
Well, it was clay.
Yeah, it's still moving.
Yep.
It was a great place to grow up and go. If you haven't been to Rachel's, they've done a really good job. Town decided to get out of the food and beverage business, which was a great idea after Winnie and me cooking for anybody. But they've leased it successfully to Rachel's for a number of years. Celeste and Mike and Patty have really done a really good job of making a really good restaurant in town. So, they've done a good job. Yeah, yes? That's the same time as 75, I think, because that's right after the town got it. They decided to make it a recreation center instead of a quote-unquote country club. Yeah, we didn't put a pool in yet, so I think we're fine. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for coming. There's lots of pictures up here if anybody wants to come and take a peek. Oh, goodness. Oh, you didn't have to. Oh,